So we've learned about the way that flowers vary with respect to symmetry, actinomorphic or zygomorphic, i.e. radial or bilateral, fusion of petals or not, and relative position of flower parts, as in hypogynous with the superior ovary, perigynous with the superior ovary, and epigynous with an inferior ovary. Now let's move on to learn about features having to do with the gynoecium. And it turns out that some flowers have a comparatively simple gynoecium. Some flowers have ones a little more intricate with some chambers inside, and some flowers have more than one stigma-style ovary unit, so they can actually mature into more than one fruit from one flower. Before we go into too much detail on that, let's refresh our memories about pollination and fruit production, particularly about fruits, because the gynoecium develops into the fruit, and the types of fruits have a lot to do with the types of female parts that the flowers have. So you'll recall, pollination involves pollen landing on a stigma. The pollen grows a tube through the style and enters an ovule. One of the pollen grains fertilizes the egg inside the ovule, which contains the female gametophyte. The ovule does, that is, which in turn contains the egg. And there are also two nuclei called central cells, and one of the pollen grains fuses with both of them to form a triploid tissue called endosperm, which is a nutritive tissue, food. A fruit, of course, is the ripened ovary containing seeds. And what a seed is basically a baby plant. It's an embryo sporophyte, and it's covered with a seed coat, and it contains some nutritive tissue. Now, you might think, because I just said it, that the nutritive tissue is endosperm, but in fact, in most plants, the nutritive tissue is not endosperm, but it's something that develops as the seed matures, and it's called a cotyledon. It's a seed leaf. And plants that have actual endosperm as their nutritive tissue, there aren't that many proportionally, but they're really important, at least economically. Grasses, the grains, such as rice and corn, the starchy part that we eat, that's actually endosperm. Most plants, however, when they mature the seeds, the endosperm gets digested, and what develops is the cotyledon. Other parts of the fruit is the ovary. Includes the seeds are covered with a seed coat, abbreviated SC in this diagram, and the only thing that's left unlabeled is the embryo, which, as you can see, it basically has leaves, and there's a root, and there's a shoot in there. Roots, shoots, and leaves. It's the headline for a newspaper story. I just don't know what the article's about. Let's take a look at pollination, partly because it's necessary to lead to fruit production, and also because there's a really nice example of a pollination mutualism that is really cool to learn about. But here's a picture, and here's a picture of it's sort of a generalist pollinator. It's a bee that it might not be that generalist. This could be the hibiscus bee that only lives on hibiscus, but nonetheless, it is a bee, and it gathers pollen to feed her babies. And when she goes from flower to flower, she might very well bang into the stigmas, which are in the center of the flower, and pollinate them. About a month later, there'll be a fruit. So it's not juicy the way we sometimes think of fruits, but it's dry. It breaks open to reveal some chambers, 5 of them actually, and there's some seeds in there, kind of round things, about the size of rice grains, I guess, but round, and that is a fruit. So, here's the example of the specialist pollinator that's kind of neat. It's a plant called Yucca, and it grows in dry places. This is along railroad tracks along Indianola Avenue and near Morse Road. And if you go visit a patch of yucca plants in about the 3rd week in June, you're very likely to see little moths flying around. And if you look more carefully, you can see some of them landed on the flowers. So this moth is on this flower. And if you look closely, you'll see that what these flowers are kind of configured in a they have 6 stamens, but the stamens, instead of having slender filaments the way we're used to, they have these kind of big, thick ones. Really nice for the moth to grab onto. And the anthers are comparatively small, but they're anthers, and they contain pollen right there. And what she does, the moth has very specialized mouth parts that can be used to gather pollen from the yucca stamens. The next thing she does is that she flies to another flower, and at the base of the flower she lays eggs. So right here where the cursor is, I'll draw a little circle, is the base of the female moth. It's also the base of the ovary. She's laying eggs inside the ovary of the flower. And what's going to happen is that when the fruit develops, her babies will eat some, but not all, of the seeds. Fruit develops. What do you have to have happen for that? Pollination. And if you look at this stigma, I don't see any pollen there. So she'll solve that problem. The next thing she does, right after she lays the egg in the ovary, in order to ensure that the ovary develops into a fruit, is that she pollinates it. She packs the pistil with pollen. She's a pistil-packing mama, thereby guaranteeing that this ovary develops into a fruit. 2 things happen involving babies. One of which is that her babies are inside, and they grow up and they eat some but not all of the seeds. And the other thing that happens is that the yucca plant's babies, i.e. the seeds, are inside and they develop too. So the only way that this plant gets pollinated is by this moth, and the only way this moth can grow up is by having its origin in this flower. So it's a very uniquely obligate mutualism or symbiosis. So if you look at this plant in later on in the season, you'll see that there are holes. There's a hole or several holes in the ovary that are caused by the larvae. They chew their way out, and they go down to the ground, and they overwinter underground, and that's evidence that there was a yucca moth in there. And that's the pollination symbiosis of yucca and the yucca moth. So what we're going to learn about is what's called Gynoecium type. And we're going to discover that there are 3 what are called Gynoecium types. And they're apocarpus, syncarpus, and unicarpellate. You'll notice that they all have carp in their name. And that's because there's something called the carpel. And what the carpel is the basic unit of the Gynoecium. And what I would and so basically what a carpel is a seed bearing leaf. Good. And so what I'd like for us to do is think in terms of plant evolution. And basically, plant anatomy is fairly simple. Pretty much everything in plant anatomy is a modified leaf. So what I'd like for us to think about is a leaf. So here's a leaf in cross-section. So this is basically an ancestral carpel. So we're going to think about evolution in kind of simple terms. An ancestral, I guess it's a pre-carpel. And so what it is it's a seed-bearing leaf. So it's called a megasporophyll, or seed leaf. And so this here's the mid vein of the leaf, and at the margins of the leaves there are seeds. So if you think of this as a face view, you'd see a leaf with seeds being born all along the margin. And so remember, please, that these are angiosperms. Their seeds are in vessels. So if you think of the margins of these leaves, of this leaf rather, the margins of this leaf coming together and fusing. So here's one half of the leaf, here's the other half of the leaf, here's where they fuse, and here's the rows of seeds. And this is basically a container within which the seeds are. And this is a very simple one. It's a carpel. It's one carpel. And it's basically the vessel that angiosperms are. And it turns out that sometimes the gynoecium of a plant is this simple, and sometimes it's not. So what we have are three what are called gynoecium types. And the three gynoecium types are, I'm going to try to draw them side by side. One is called unicarpellate. The other one is called syncarpous. And the third and final one is called apocarpous. Okay, and they all have carp in their name. So we're going to make some diagrams. And all the diagrams are going to be basically the same and fairly simple. We'll start them all off. What we want to draw is just the gynoecium, and we're going to not draw sepals or petals or stamens. And so this is just a flower, a pedicel with a receptacle. And we'll draw this, here's sort of a face view, and then we'll draw some little things that would basically be inside, so we'll draw them light. Let's make a cross-section of this. We'll do it up here. Cross-section would be pretty much what we've already drawn, with one chamber, one row of seeds. It's a carpel that's pretty much like this one that we drew over here on the right. And this is called a unicarpellate gynoecium. It's a fairly simple thing. Not many plants have a unicarpellate gynoecium, but by the way, one of the most important plant families, the fabulous Fabaceae, the pea family. Well, think of the pea. Think of it like a snow pea. That is a single carpel. It's a fairly simple thing with one row of seeds inside. How else can you be? Well, let's draw something like this. I didn't mean to make it so much larger, but I did so. And then we'll go like this. There we go. We'll draw some lines on the outside. Here we go. Boom. And a cross section of this would be maybe like this. And so the seeds, well, let's put some seeds in here. Seeds, attached to the middle. Boom. Wonder how I did with that. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, good enough. This is called the syncarpous gynoecium, and what it actually consists of is, and I was trying to make 5 of these carpels fused together, so that you had some clues. You have these partitions when you do the cross section. If you look at the stigma, you have some branches to it. If you look on the outside, you see some lines. It's sort of like this is made of several units that are fused together. I think of these gynoecium types as being like a school. So a unicarpellate gynoecium is like a one-room schoolhouse. A syncarpous gynoecium is like a building with several rooms. And a apocarpous gynoecium is like a campus, say, with a lot of one-room schoolhouses. So let's draw this if we can. So I'll draw one of these like we did before. I'll draw another one like this. And what we've got here, okay, that's enough. I can't draw anymore. They won't fit. This is an apocarpous gynoecium. And what you've got with this gynoecium is actually, in this case it's 3, but it might be more, separate stigma-style ovary units that are on one flower. So this is one flower. You know, it would have had sepals and petals and stamens, but it's got separate pistils. Yeah. So the carpels, pistils, gynoecium, the general overall terminology that's the best. Let's take a look at another picture. Let's take a look at the picture again. So this picture shows a little. It's kind of a prettier drawing, but it's not as clear as I might like. Let's take a look at the unicarpellate gynoecium. See, it's got one chamber, and it's got one row of seeds. Here's the syncarpous gynoecium. It's got several chambers. If you look on the outside of it, you can see some ridges, sometimes they'll be visited. If you look at the stigma, it's branched. So that's a good clue. In fact, you can count how many stigma branches or how many chambers or how many lines. And you can see that it's this one over here on the left, it consists of 3 carpels. This one over here on the right looks like it consists of 5. It's called syncarpus. Here's our unicarpellate gynoecium, that's 1 carpel, and the apocarpus gynoecium. Each one of these, it doesn't show up as vividly as we'd like because they're small. But each one of these little granular units is its own kind of small stigma style over a unit. And each one of them, by the way, is unicarpellate. That's why. So this is drawing one of them. The drawing could be a little more revealing that this is just one of something that there's many of. I don't know what apo means, but apocarpus means having several to many separate individual stigma style ovary units and 1 flower. And oh, by the way, since the flower is the ripened ovary containing seeds, this 1 flower can produce many fruits. That's kind of weird. Boom. Let's look at some examples. Here's an example of a unicarpellate gynoecium. You can't really tell from the picture of the flowers, but you can tell from the fruits. These are the fruits of that red bud. This is a member of the closely related to the, at least, Fabulous Fabaceae, the legume/pea family. This is a very closely allied family, sometimes considered a subfamily. And if you look at these fruits, they kind of look like a leaf that's folded over. And there, where the seeds are attached, would be the margins of that ancestral leaf, and the other side would be the midvein. And this is a unicarpellate gynoecium. It's not a super common gynoecium type, but it's found in a particularly important plant family called the Fabaceae, the legume family. Okay, so here's another type of. This is a plant with a syncarpus gynoecium. This is called wild hyacinth, Chamasia scylloides. It's a member of the old lily family. There's been some revisions of nomenclature so that some of what were formerly considered to be large families with a lot of different genera have been broken up into smaller ones. And I don't know, because I haven't learned them all yet, what family this is, but we're going to pretend it's the 1990s and learn some old school names for the families, partly because it's a little bit easy to grasp conceptually, and also because our textbook/field guides are a little older, classical. So anyway, but I digress. Let's take a look at this. Here's a cross section of this, and you can see that there's 3 chambers, each with their own. I wish I could see the cursor. It's only a little bigger, then this would work better. See these 3 chambers. So this is like many members of the so-called lily family. Everything's in 3s, and 3 sepals, 3 petals, 6 stamens, 2 times 3, and a pistil that consists of a syncarpus gynoecium that's composed of 3 carpels. Okay, and here it is in fruit, and you can see those chambers. So you can see that this is a syncarpus gynoecium. Some of the flowers that we've seen pictures of before, now that we look at them again, you can see they also have evidence of what gynoecium type they are. This is a syncarpus gynoecium. It looks like it's 2 carpels. That would be a good guess. The yucca we just looked at, also in a family related to the lily family, and formerly considered to be in it, 3 carpels fused together. Remember we talked about the protandry in the geranium, and look at this. So you can see that this, with these 5 lobes, I bet if you made a cross section of this ovary, you'd see 5 chambers. It's syncarpus gynoecium composed of 5 carpels. Here's another plant with a syncarpus gynoecium composed of, is it 3? I think those are 3. Let's see if I can denote them. If only the cursor was a little bigger. Now I gotta press that. There are 3 very narrow stigmas here that I'm that I can't quite denote because the cursor isn't large enough for me to see as I present this. Grr, arg. Here's one whose name is Trillium. Everything's in threes. 3 sepals, 3 petals, 6 stamens, which is 2 times 3. Math even I can do. And you can see these 3 in the middle, these 3 with wider, kind of slightly curled stigmas. So these are examples of plants with syncarpous gynoecium. Oh, here's another one. This is a plant called Sweet Sicily. And Sweet Sicily, you can see these 2 prominent branches of the style. So this is a syncarpous gynoecium composed of 2 carpels. Okay, let's take a look at the apocarpous gynoecium. And this is regarded as being sort of a fairly primitive, kind of an ancestral-ish condition for angiosperms. So basically, if we think of a flower as being kind of like a branch, and branches have leaves that are separate and spirally arranged, that's kind of what like some flowers are, and especially the ones that have apocarpous gynoeciums. Gynoeciums? And this is a plant called tulip tree. And what we have here is, let's see if I can make this clearer. I go with a highlighter and then a light color. It's probably not going to work because it's too dark, but yeah, it's too hard to see. There are not very many petals, but there are a number of, too many to count, of these pencil-like stamens that are very tightly arranged in a spiral. And then in the middle, that thing looks like a cone. That's several, about a couple dozen carpels, separate individual carpels, separate individual stigma-style ovary units that are packed together. When this tulip tree is in fruit, each one of these little wing-like structures is a fruit. It's a special kind of a fruit. It's called a samara. It's a basically one-seeded fruit with a wing that blows through the air. And so these little scale-like things, they're fruits. And notice that each one of these large units, of which there are about 5 showing up here in the foreground, was a flower several months earlier. And now they're maturing into fruits, plural, for each flower, because it has an apocarpous gynoecium. Here's some hepatica, a lovely member of the buttercup family. And in the center of these flowers, especially the one on the left, because it's a little old and they're sort of a bit expanded, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10-ish separate carpels of an apocarpous gynoecium. When these flowers mature into fruits, each one of those will produce a fruit. But let me say that right. When this flower on the left matures, there will be about as many fruits from that one flower as you see carpels in this picture. One flower, many fruits. Here's another example, also in the buttercup family. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 carpels. And this is one flower, and it's going to mature 8 fruits. Here we have a raspberry. Oh, I'm sorry, a blackberry. And here's a cross-section of that blackberry showing some of the details. The details are lots of stamens. Oh, actually, I want to show you another detail. This is a member of the rose family, which actually has perigynous flowers. I'm slightly changing the focus here. And it's got a little bit of a hypanthium. It's not very much of one. But the sepals and the petals and the base of the stamens are fused. And then the sepals come off here and the petals and the stamens. So this part right here is a tiny suggestion of a hypanthium. It's not a big cup the way we saw in the cherry flower, but that feature, this little fusion of the sepals and the petals and the bases of the stamens right here, makes it clear that this is a member of the rose family and not the closely related-ish buttercup family. But I digress. What we want to show you here is lots of stamens, and here is a whole bunch of individual carpels. And when this matures into fruit, we've got a bunch of fruits. These look like little tiny plums or cherries or something. They basically are. But so this is what's called a aggregate fruit. Each one of these individual items is technically a fruit, but the whole thing is a unit, and that's because it has an apocarpous gynoecium. Placentation type. That's something we won't talk about. But What we will talk about is different types of fruits. So in the next podcast of flowers and fruits for fans of food is going to be fruit types. So thanks for tuning in, and see you next time.